Hello everyone. Tonight we're stepping into a world of imagination, a world where the impossible becomes possible. What if magic wasn't just fantasy, but a real force shaping life in medieval times? Castles, knights, kingdoms, all under the influence of sorcery and spellcraft. Join me as we explore how history might have unfolded if wizards, enchanted weapons, and mystical creatures were as real as kings and queens. Let's dive into the unimaginable. The year is 1147. The world groans beneath the weight of crusades, kings, and famines. Castles rise like jagged teeth across hills, and peasants bend under the weight of taxes and hunger. Yet in this alternate timeline, there is another truth. Rivers that whisper spells to fishermen, forests that guard their borders with illusions, and monasteries where monks copy grimoires alongside scripture. The church preaches salvation, but also binds sorcerers to its service. Lords demand knights and soldiers, but keep wizards in their halls as counselors and weapons. And peasants, those bent and weary souls, pray as much to hedge witches as to saints. In this age, magic is not rare. It hums like a hidden current beneath every village, every battlefield, every cathedral. But though it is woven into life, it is feared. For every healer who closes wounds with a breath, there is a necromancer who plucks the dead from their graves. For every enchantress who blesses a crop, there is a warlock who curses a harvest. The balance between light and shadow has never been so fragile. Our story begins in a small village at the edge of Normandy, where a boy named Alaric, son of a blacksmith, learns that he is not meant for hammer and anvil. His fate will drag him through courts and cathedrals, through wars both mundane and magical, and into the secret heart of this enchanted medieval world. But to understand his journey, we must first step into the village itself, where the smoke of the forge mingles with the incense of spellwork, and where the first tremors of destiny crackle like lightning waiting for a storm. The morning sun rose weakly over the thatched roofs, light piercing through mist that clung to the fields. Alaric stood barefoot outside the forge, the anvil still cool from the night before. He carried the weight of expectation heavier than any sword. His father's dream that he would inherit the trade. Yet even as he hefted the hammer, sparks leapt where none should have been, sparks that danced and lingered like fireflies, spelling patterns in the air. His father cursed him for clumsiness, but Alaric knew. He felt it in his bones. The forge listened to him. The metal bent too eagerly, too unnaturally. Something was wrong, or perhaps something was very right. That same day, far beyond the village, a council gathered in Paris beneath the vaulted arches of Notre Dame. Not priests alone, but bishops, abbots, and the king's own magus. Reports had reached them of omens, wolves walking on two legs, rivers running backward, and peasants whispering of a prophecy that one born in the fields of Normandy would change the balance of magic forever. Some called it blasphemy. Others called it salvation. And already forces stirred to seek the child destined to rise. As bells tolled across the city, Alaric's hammer fell once more, and the glowing iron twisted into the shape of a blade it was never meant to be. His father stared, terrified, as runes shimmered faintly along its length. The boy dropped the weapon, heart pounding. Somewhere in the distance, unseen but certain, destiny had begun to move. The forge smelled of smoke and fear. Alaric's father, Hugo, picked up the strange blade with trembling hands. Its surface still glowed faintly, though the fire had long cooled. The runes, shifting, whispering symbols, writhed as though alive, then faded into the steel. Hugo spat to ward off evil. He had hammered metal all his life, and never once had iron sung back. "Boy," he said, voice low and hard, "you will not touch the anvil again. Not until the priest sees this." Alaric swallowed his protest. He wanted to shout that it wasn't evil, that the metal had felt alive in his hands, like a friend waiting to be shaped, but words froze on his tongue. For in Normandy, to speak too loudly of magic was to invite suspicion, or worse. The church tolerated sorcery when it served its altars and kings, but villagers muttering of unnatural gifts often found themselves tied to stakes. That evening, Father Mathieu came. He was old, his robes patched with careful stitches, and his eyes sharp as glass. He examined the blade under candlelight, muttering prayers. At last he turned to Alaric. "Did you call the runes?" he asked. "No, Father," Alaric whispered. "They came on their own." Mathieu frowned. "Then they came for you." The priest left with the sword wrapped in cloth. Alaric's father did not sleep that night, nor did Alaric. The village lay quiet, but the boy felt the air quiver, as if listening. Far away, across the channel, England brooded. The throne trembled between rival claimants, and war brewed like a storm. But not only steel and banners decided power anymore. Each lord sought magisters and sorcerers as keenly as knights. Castles stood not only with walls and moats, but with wards of flame and stone. In London, whispers spread of Normandy's rune child, and in Paris the Council of Bishops argued fiercely. "The child must be found," said Magus Odo, advisor to the French king. His voice thundered in the great hall. "If prophecy names him, then he will decide the fate of kingdoms. We cannot leave him to grow wild among peasants." "And if the devil speaks through him?" asked Abbot Gerard, clutching his rosary. "Then we must burn him before he spreads ruin." Others nodded, uneasy, but one bishop, Eleanor of Rouen, raised her hand. "Perhaps we should ask what God intends, rather than presume. If the boy is marked, then heaven placed that mark." The debate raged long into the night, while riders prepared to scour the countryside. Back in the village, life pretended to continue. Cows were milked, fields plowed, bread baked. But neighbors eyed Alaric strangely now, whispering when he passed. Some crossed themselves. Others asked him secretly if he could charm a better harvest or heal a sick child. He felt their fear and their hope pressing on him, as heavy as the blacksmith's hammer. One morning, as mist curled through the fields, Alaric wandered into the forest beyond the village. He walked not out of duty, but out of need. The trees seemed to breathe with him. Birds sang, but between their notes he heard something deeper, a hum, like distant bells, drawing him onward. He came to a clearing where an ancient oak stood, gnarled and massive, its roots coiled like snakes, its branches tangled with age. He touched the bark, and the air around him shivered. A voice, not human, not quite, whispered in his mind, "Child of iron and fire, you wake the sleeping runes. The age of shadow comes, and you are its hinge." Alaric jerked back, heart racing. The oak stood silent, but in its bark, faint as breath, symbols glowed, the same runes that had burned along the sword. His hand tingled, and for the first time, he knew beyond doubt, his life would never be ordinary. That night, riders came. Cloaked in the colors of Rouen, they entered the village with torches. Father Mathieu greeted them gravely. Alaric, watching from the forge, felt his stomach turn cold. One of the riders dismounted, her hood falling back to reveal a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found Alaric at once. "There," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "The boy! Bring him!" The villagers shrank back. His father stepped forward, fists clenched, but the riders were many, and their swords gleamed. Alaric's heart hammered. The prophecy he had never asked for had already reached the ears of power. Normandy would never let him go, and in the shadows beyond the torchlight, unseen eyes watched as destiny's pieces began to move. Alaric's breath caught in his throat as two of the riders seized his arms. His father roared and lunged, but a mailed fist struck him down into the mud. The villagers looked away, afraid to interfere. Even Father Mathieu lowered his eyes, though his lips moved silently in prayer. The stern woman, Eleanor, Bishop of Rouen, studied Alaric as though weighing him like iron in her palm. "The runes stir in your blood," she said, not unkindly. "You are not safe here. The king demands you." Alaric tried to speak, but no words came. His mother, pale and weeping, clutched his sleeve until a soldier gently pulled her away. He wanted to scream, to resist, to deny what was happening. But deep inside, beneath the terror, he felt something else, a tremor of inevitability. As if the forest's voice had been right. He was a hinge, and the world was about to swing on him. The riders bound him on horseback and carried him from the village. The people watched in silence. Some spat, others crossed themselves, and a few bowed their heads as though witnessing a funeral. The forge's smoke drifted upward, the last thread of the only home he had known. The journey to Rouen took days. They rode through villages scarred by famine, through forests thick with mist, and past monasteries where chants mingled with spells that lit candles without flame. Alaric saw things he had never imagined. A healer in the marketplace closing a man wound with nothing but her breath. A sorcerer standing on a hill, calling rain to break a drought. Children tossing pebbles that turned briefly into birds before falling back to stone. Magic was not hidden. It was everywhere, a constant current. Yet it was also feared, guarded, bound tightly by church and crown. At night, Bishop Eleanor questioned him. "Do you dream of symbols?" she asked. "Yes," Alaric admitted. "They burn behind my eyes." "And do you feel them when you touch iron?" He nodded, like fire waiting to leap. She listened carefully but revealed little of her own thoughts. Only once did she speak softer, when the campfire flickered low. "You must be cautious, boy. The king's court is full of those who would use you or destroy you. The runes are older than kingdoms, older even than Christ. They whisper of power men were never meant to hold. If you cannot master them, they will master you." When at last they reached Rouen, Alaric's eyes widened. The city surged with life, merchants shouting in the square, bells ringing from cathedral towers, beggars and knights jostling side by side. And above it all loomed the castle, its walls not only stone but inscribed with glowing wards. The gates opened with a shimmer of unseen force, and Alaric felt the weight of enchantments pressing on his chest. Inside, he was led to a hall hung with banners and filled with incense. King Louis himself sat upon a carved throne, a crown heavy on his brow. Beside him stood Magus Odo, tall and gaunt, his robes shimmering faintly as though woven from starlight. "So," the king said, his voice echoing, "the Rune Child." His gaze cut through Alaric like a blade. "Tell me, boy, do you serve God and crown?" Alaric stammered. I don't know." The hall went silent. Murmurs rippled. Odo's lips curled in a thin smile. The king's eyes darkened, but Eleanor stepped forward quickly. "He is untrained, Majesty, a child still. His answer means nothing yet. Give me time, and I will shape him into a servant of the realm." Louis leaned back, considering. At last he nodded. "So be it. Train him. But if he falters, if the devil shows his face, he burns." From that day forward, Alaric was bound to the court. His lessons began at once under Magus Odo, whose methods were cruel and precise. Odo made him trace runes in ash until his fingers bled, chant spells until his voice cracked, and stare into flames until visions tore at his mind. "Magic is not wonder," Odo hissed. "It is discipline. Master it, or be consumed." But at night, Bishop Eleanor offered gentler guidance. She taught him balance, prayer, and the belief that magic could serve not only power, but mercy. "The runes are not evil," she whispered once as they walked the cloisters. "They are a language, and language can be used for prayer as well as curse." Alaric felt torn between their teachings. Odo's path promised strength and survival. Eleanor's path promised meaning and hope. And deep inside, the runes whispered, still, restless, ancient, waiting. Beyond the walls of Rouen, storms brewed. In England, nobles rallied armies. In the Holy Roman Empire, rumors spread of necromancers raising legions of the dead. And in the north, Viking raiders spoke of witches binding the sea itself. All across Europe, the balance of power teetered, not only between kings, but between light and shadow. And somewhere in the dark, unseen by courts or bishops, another force watched Alaric's rise. A figure cloaked in shadows, walking among ruined abbeys and whispering to the restless dead. His voice carried across graveyards like smoke. "The Rune Child has awakened. Soon the chains will break." The days at court blurred into a rhythm of duty and strain. Alaric rose before dawn to kneel in the chapel, where monks intoned prayers woven with protective charms. Then came lessons, first with Odo, then with Eleanor. By dusk he was too weary to eat, yet too restless to sleep. Odo taught him to draw power from the elements. Fire answered Alaric most fiercely. Sparks leapt when his hands touched flint, and candles flared when he entered a room. But Odo pressed harder. "A spark is nothing," he sneered. "A storm is everything. Do not pet the fire. Command it." One evening, Odo set a brazier before him and ordered, "Quench it." Alaric stretched out his hand. The flames bent, wavered, then died in a hiss of smoke. Pride swelled in him, until the smoke coiled into shapes, twisting runes he could not control. They clawed at his mind until he fell, gasping, to the floor. Odo only laughed. "Good. The runes hunger. Learn to feed them, or they will devour you." Eleanor's teachings were different. She brought him to the infirmary where monks treated the sick. She asked him to lay hands on a fevered child. Hesitant, he did, and the runes stirred gently, cooling the child's brow, easing his pain. "Do you see?" Eleanor whispered. "The same gift that burns can also heal. The choice is yours." Her words stayed with him long after, yet so did Odo's cruelty. Alaric felt caught between two worlds, one of power, one of mercy. Both seemed necessary, yet both seemed impossible to reconcile. The court itself was no safer. Nobles watched him with suspicion, whispering that he was a pawn of sorcerers, or worse, a demon's child. Servants crossed themselves when he passed, yet some lords sought him eagerly, hoping to bind his power to their cause. Invitations piled upon Eleanor's desk from barons and dukes alike, requesting the rune child's blessing on their armies or crops. One night Alaric overheard a heated quarrel between two knights in the hall. "If the king commands him, he will end wars with a gesture, or start them," the other retorted. "No man should hold such fire." The words haunted him. He had never wanted crowns or kingdoms, only to belong. Yet the world seemed intent on bending him into something more. Weeks passed before the first test came. A messenger arrived breathless at court. A neighboring barony was aflame, raided by brigands wielding strange sorcery. Fields burned, cattle sickened, and peasants fled. The king ordered Odo to march with soldiers and bring Alaric along. Alaric had never left the castle since his capture. Now he rode with armored knights, their banners snapping in the wind, their faces grim. The journey took them through charred fields and villages where ash clung to the air. Children cried in ruins while their parents begged for help. Some turned their eyes to Alaric, murmuring as though he were already a saint or monster. At last they reached the barony. The brigands had gone, but their curse lingered. Crops lay blackened, though no ordinary fire had touched them. The earth itself seemed poisoned, the soil reeking of sulfur. The soldiers muttered uneasily. Even Odo frowned. This is no common raid. Necromancy taints this ground. That night, Alaric wandered the edges of the ruined fields. The runes whispered violently in his head, pulling him toward the poisoned earth. He knelt, pressing his hand to the soil. At once visions flooded him, corpses walking under moonlight, shadowed figures chanting over blood, and a face cloaked in darkness watching him. He wrenched his hand away, heart hammering. The soil still whispered faintly. Whatever had been summoned here had not truly left. The soldiers wanted to return, but Odo forced Alaric to remain. "Cleanse it," the magus demanded. "If you are the rune child, prove it." Alaric trembled. He remembered Eleanor's lessons, healing, not destruction. So he closed his eyes, whispered the runes he felt rather than understood, and laid his palm upon the ground again. This time the earth shivered, but light spread like veins of gold through the blackened soil. The air cleared, the stench faded, and the fields seemed to breathe again. The soldiers gasped. Some knelt, crossing themselves. Even Odo's eyes widened before narrowing. "Impressive," he said, "but you risked everything. Such power could have consumed you." Alaric ignored him. For in that moment, he realized something Odo would never say aloud. The runes did not hunger only for power. They hungered for purpose. Yet far beyond the cleansed fields, in a ruined abbey deep in the woods, a cloaked figure watched the stars and smiled. Ravens circled overhead, their wings glinting in moonlight. He had felt the soil shift, the runes awaken. "So," the shadowed man murmured, The boy chooses light. How quaint. But light casts shadows, and I will be waiting in them. The cleansing of the fields changed everything. Word spread quickly, faster than fire through dry grass. In taverns and churches, men whispered of the Rune Child, who healed poisoned land with a touch. Some said he was a saint sent by God. Others muttered of heresy and witchcraft. By the time Alaric and the company returned to Rouen, half of Normandy already seemed to know his name. The king received him in the great hall, nobles pressing in to see. "They say you healed a field of death," Louis declared, his crown glinting in torchlight. "Is this true?" Alaric bowed his head, uncertain. "I only tried to mend what was broken." The hall erupted with clamor. Some shouted praise, others condemnation. Odo raised his hands, silencing them. "The boy's power is real," the Magus said, "but raw, dangerous. He must be tempered like steel, lest he snap." Louis leaned forward, eyes bright with ambition. "Then temper him quickly, for if England marches, I will need more than swords." In the days that followed, Alaric felt the pressure of eyes everywhere. Servants whispered prayers when he passed. Monks watched him with awe or with fear. Nobles sought his favor with gifts of food, wine, even gold. Yet Alaric felt hollow. He had not asked for fame. He had only wanted to understand the strange fire within him. Eleanor sensed his unease. One evening she brought him to the cathedral, where the choir's voices lifted through arches carved with angels. Candles flickered, casting halos of light on the stone. "You are becoming a symbol," she told him softly. "People will shape you into what they need, a savior, a weapon, a curse. You must choose who you are before they choose for you." Alaric stared at the altar, where incense curled like smoke. "But I don't know who I am." "Then that is your journey," she said, "to discover it before the world swallows you." But even as she spoke, shadows moved elsewhere. In the forests of Saxony, necromancers gathered. Cloaked in black, they knelt before a figure whose face was hidden beneath a mask of bone. His voice was like wind through a crypt. "The Rune Child awakens. Already he heals what we have broken. He will stand against us if left unchecked." A chorus of whispers answered. "Then break him." The bone-masked man raised his hand. Ravens circled overhead, their eyes glowing faintly red. "Not yet. Let him grow. Let him believe he is chosen. And then, when the time is right, we will show him that all light is born from shadow." Meanwhile, Odo drove Alaric harder. The Magus demanded he summon storms, command beasts, bend metal with thought alone. Alaric succeeded sometimes, failed often, and bled always. "Power is pain," Odo hissed. "Only those who endure deserve to wield it." Eleanor countered with patience. She took him to villages struck by plague, teaching him to soothe fevers and purify water. Alaric found himself torn between these two visions of magic, one that sought control, another that sought compassion. Both seemed necessary in a world bristling with war, but which path would shape him? The test came sooner than he expected. A knight of the court, Sir Roland, proud and cruel, mocked Alaric openly during a feast. "Behold the boy saint," Roland jeered, raising his goblet. "Will you bless my wine, child, or turn it to ash?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Alaric flushed, trying to remain silent, but Roland pressed, leaning close. "Or perhaps you can summon me a new horse. Mine died, poor beast, from plague. Maybe you poisoned it yourself." The words stung. The hall watched, waiting. Odo's eyes glittered with challenge. Eleanor shook her head slightly, urging restraint. Alaric's hand tightened. For a moment, the runes inside him flared, begging release. Sparks leapt faintly across his palm. Gasps echoed. Roland sneered, ready for a display. But Alaric forced the runes down, clenching his fist until his nails cut his skin. "No," he said quietly. "I am not your jester." Silence fell. Then Roland's smirk faded, replaced by something colder. Hatred. He would not forget this humiliation. That night, Alaric lay awake in his chamber. The runes burned under his skin, restless, hungry. He stared at the moonlight on the stone wall and whispered to himself, "I am not your weapon. I am not your curse. But what am I?" Far below, in the catacombs of Rouen, shadows stirred. Roland, drunk and bitter, stumbled into darkness and met a voice that promised vengeance. "The boy shames you," it whispered, "but we can make him fall." The feast had ended, but Roland's bitterness only sharpened in the days that followed. Once celebrated as a knight of renown, he now found himself whispered about in corridors, mocked for having been silenced by a mere boy. Pride festered into poison. Late one night, Roland descended into the crypt beneath Rouen's cathedral, drawn by a voice that curled like smoke in his mind. Torches sputtered as he walked, shadows stretching unnaturally long. At the far end of the crypt, among crumbling tombs, he found him, the bone-masked figure, taller than any man, cloaked in black. "You seek vengeance," the figure said, voice low as a grave's sigh. Roland gripped his sword. "Who are you?" "Your ally," the shadow replied. "I can give you strength. The boy made you a fool, but together we can unmake him. All I ask is loyalty." Roland hesitated. His hand trembled, but pride roared louder than doubt. He knelt. "What must I do?" The bone-masked man extended a pale hand. "Open the gates when I call, and in return you will rise above all who mocked you." The pact was sealed in silence. Roland felt a coldness coil around his heart, and in his eyes a faint crimson glow flickered. Oblivious to the knight's bargain, Alaric's training grew harsher. Odo demanded he practice before the king's court, summoning fire from thin air. The audience gasped as Alaric lit the great hall's chandeliers with a gesture, though his arms trembled from the strain. "See," Odo proclaimed, "he is no child. He is the blade of the crown." But Eleanor, standing nearby, frowned. After the display, she pulled Alaric aside. "You cannot let them wield you like a sword," she warned. "What choice do I have?" Alaric asked bitterly. "If I disobey, they'll call me heretic. If I obey, I become their weapon. I'm trapped." "Then you must find your own path," Eleanor said firmly. "Not Odo's, not the king's, yours." Her words comforted him, but only faintly, for already Alaric felt the weight of eyes, expectant, hungry, fearful, pressing down on him wherever he went. Beyond Normandy, storms gathered. England's King Stephen rallied sorcerers to his cause, weaving enchantments into his army's banners. Reports came of Saxon warlords marching with necromancers at their side, corpses shambling in their wake. The Pope in Rome, alarmed by rumors of the Rune Child, sent letters demanding his loyalty to the Church above all kings. Europe stirred, restless and divided, and at its heart stood a boy still uncertain of who he was. The first strike came suddenly. One cold dawn, as mist blanketed Rouen, the bells clanged in alarm. Riders stormed the city gates, their eyes glazed red, their weapons dripping shadow. Soldiers rushed to defend the walls, but Roland, true to his oath, had already sabotaged the wards that guarded the gates. The attackers poured inside. Alaric awoke to chaos. Shouts echoed through the castle, smoke thickened the air, and steel clashed on stone. He grabbed the small dagger by his bedside, a pitiful weapon, but the only one he had, and stumbled into the corridor. "Alaric!" Eleanor's voice cut through the din. She ran toward him, her robes torn, clutching a staff etched with faint light. "The walls are breached. You must get to the chapel. The wards there can hold." But before they could move, the shadow fell. The bone-masked figure emerged from the smoke, towering, his presence chilling the air. Roland stood beside him, eyes burning with crimson fire. Eleanor raised her staff. "Run!" she commanded. Alaric froze, the runes within him flaring in panic. Sparks danced across his hands, uncontrolled, wild. The bone-masked man laughed softly, the sound hollow as a tomb. "At last," he said, "the hinge of destiny stands before me." And then the world erupted in fire and shadow. The castle shook as the first clash rang out, steel on steel, spell against spell. Knights stormed the corridors, their blades flashing, but the attackers fought like men possessed, eyes glowing crimson, wounds closing faster than they could be cut. Eleanor planted her staff and a ring of light burst outward, hurling enemies back. She shoved Alaric behind her. "Go!" she shouted. "The chapel!" But Alaric couldn't move. The bone-masked man strode forward, every step heavier than the last, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the stones. "You feel it, don't you?" the man said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The runes inside you. They answer not to kings, not to priests, but to me, to the shadow." Alaric shook his head violently. No. But even as he denied it, the runes inside him stirred, whispering in the same rhythm as the masked man's words. Roland lunged with his sword, eyes burning with hatred. Alaric raised his hand instinctively. Sparks flared, and Roland's blade bent in midair, twisting like a serpent before shattering into shards. The knight fell back, clutching his bleeding hands, snarling like a beast. The bone-masked man only laughed. "Good! You bend iron as if it were clay, but will you bend the world when the time comes?" The corridor erupted with fire. Odo arrived, hurling runes that blazed like comets, his face twisted with fury. "Back to the pit with you, carrion!" he roared. His spells slammed into the masked figure, sending cracks through the stone, but the man did not fall. Shadows swallowed the fire, coiling like smoke around Odo's arms. Eleanor pulled Alaric down a side passage. "He is not for you to face. Not yet. Run!" They fled through winding halls, the roar of battle echoing behind them. Bodies littered the ground, soldiers, servants, even monks clutching charms that had failed them. The castle stank of blood and ash. At last, they burst into the chapel, its doors slamming shut with a boom of enchanted iron. Eleanor's staff glowed, sealing the wards. The air inside was still, heavy with incense and candlelight. Alaric collapsed to his knees, trembling. "Who was he?" "An old wound," Eleanor said grimly. "A necromancer who should have died long ago. He calls himself Morcar the Bone-Masked, and he will not stop until he has you." Alaric's chest heaved. "Why me? Why always me?" "Because prophecy names you," Eleanor said, kneeling before him, "and prophecy terrifies men like him." Hours passed. Outside, the battle raged. The defenders fought bravely, but the city burned. At dawn, the bells tolled once more. Rouen was lost. The king ordered retreat. Survivors streamed from the castle through hidden tunnels. Alaric stumbled with them, smoke in his lungs, Eleanor's hand gripping his arm like iron. Odo limped behind, his robes scorched, his fury unquenched. When they emerged into the countryside, the sight broke Alaric's heart. Rouen's towers blazed, its banners fell, and its people fled like ants before fire. He had thought the wards unbreakable, the king untouchable, but stone and crown had crumbled before shadow. Eleanor turned to him. "This is only the beginning. Morcar will not rest until you are his, or destroyed. We cannot stay. We must take you beyond Normandy, where his reach is weaker." "And the king?" Alaric asked. "He will rally again," Odo snapped. "But with or without him, the boy must be forged into a weapon. Next time, he must not flee." Alaric clenched his fists. The runes inside him burned with shame and fear, but also something harder. Resolve. He looked once more at the smoking ruins of Rouen. He had lost his village, his father's forge, and now his city. How much more would be taken before he understood what he truly was? Far behind them, atop the walls of the fallen city, Morcar watched the survivors scatter. Ravens swirled around him, their cries harsh as steel. Roland knelt at his side, eyes still glowing faintly red, blood dripping from his gauntlet. "You let them escape," Roland growled. "Of course," Morcar replied, voice smooth as silk. "The boy must taste despair before he can be broken. Every step he takes, every ally he gains, will only make his fall sweeter." He lifted his bone mask to the rising sun. "The hinge of destiny has swung, and soon the door will open." The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. Alaric rode with Eleanor, Odo, and a handful of surviving soldiers through the countryside, leaving the smoking ruin of Rouen behind. Villagers they passed knelt to Eleanor for blessings, while their eyes darted nervously toward Alaric. Some whispered prayers of hope, others muttered curses. At night, around dwindling campfires, the survivors argued. "We should ride to Paris," one knight urged. "The king must rally his banners." "No," Odo countered. "Paris will only bind the boy tighter in politics. His power must be shaped elsewhere, far from prying eyes." "And where, then?" another demanded. Eleanor's voice cut through the debate. "To the monasteries, to the keepers of the old grimoires. There are places still untouched by Morcar's shadow." The argument ended there, but Alaric noticed Odo's scowl. The Magus wanted him sharpened like a blade. Eleanor wanted him tempered like gold, and he himself wanted only to understand the fire inside. Their journey took them first to small villages, where Alaric saw the scars of war and magic more clearly than ever. In one hamlet, a plague spread through the air like smoke, villagers coughing blood. Eleanor urged Alaric to try his gift. He hesitated, but knelt beside a boy burning with fever. The runes stirred. Alaric whispered to them, not commanding, but asking. His hands glowed faintly, and the boy's breathing eased. Hope rippled through the villagers, though fear followed quickly. Some fell to their knees, calling him a saint. Others backed away, muttering that no good could come from such sorcery. That night, Alaric lay awake, staring at the stars. He felt both proud and burdened. Every life he touched seemed to bind him tighter to prophecy's chain. In the weeks that followed, they reached an abbey deep in the forests of Burgundy. Its monks were scholars of both scripture and spell, guardians of texts too dangerous for common hands. The abbot, a stern man named Brother Lucian, welcomed Eleanor but regarded Alaric with suspicion. "He is young," Lucian said. "Unready. Power like his destroys more than it heals." Eleanor answered calmly, "That is why he must learn." The abbey became Alaric's refuge and prison. Days were filled with study. Old grimoires written in languages that seemed to shimmer on the page, chants that twisted the air, rituals binding fire and water. Nights were restless, dreams filled with visions of burning cities and bone masks. Odo pressed him hardest. "The Rune Child cannot remain a student forever," he barked. "Morcar grows stronger each day. You must learn to strike." But Eleanor insisted on balance. She made Alaric walk among the poor who came to the abbey's gates, blessing them, healing where he could. "You cannot wield power without knowing who suffers beneath it," she told him. One night, the abbey trembled. Bells rang in alarm. Shadows crept across the walls, though no torches burned. Ravens screeched above. Alaric rushed to the courtyard, where monks panicked, clutching their charms. In the center of the yard lay a body, Roland. His armor dented, his face pale, his eyes closed. The monks recoiled. "He is cursed," one cried. "Leave him." But Alaric stepped forward. He saw the faintest breath still stirring Roland's chest. Against Odo's protests, he laid his hands on the knight. The runes flared. Pain lanced through Alaric as he felt shadow and fire twist within Roland's soul. He pushed deeper, sweating, fighting to untangle the corruption. At last, with a gasp, Roland's eyes flew open. They no longer glowed red, though his face twisted with confusion and shame. Alaric staggered back, drained. Roland looked at him with a mixture of hatred and awe. "Why save me?" he rasped. Alaric answered simply, "Because I could." The abbey remained uneasy. Some monks feared Alaric had invited shadow inside their walls, but others whispered of miracles, and pilgrims soon gathered at the gates. Meanwhile, Roland sat in silence, wrestling with guilt. He had betrayed his king, his people, and himself. Now he lingered between redemption and ruin. And far away in caverns beneath Saxony, Morcar felt the bond snap. His puppet had slipped the leash. Yet instead of rage, he smiled. "Good," he whispered. "The boy tastes mercy. Let him believe he redeems the broken. When the day comes, that belief will break him all the deeper." The days at the abbey grew tense. Roland, once a proud knight, moved like a shadow among the monks, avoided by most and cursed by some. Soldiers spat when he passed, calling him traitor. Odo snarled openly. You should have let him rot, the Magus told Alaric. Mercy is weakness. A traitor cannot be unmade by your pity. But Eleanor disagreed. Even shadows can turn if given light. She often reminded Alaric, the choices you make are what shape you, not the power you hold. Alaric stood between them, torn. He had felt Roland's corruption firsthand, the cold claws of Morcar's influence. Saving him had nearly broken his own spirit, and yet, when he looked at Roland now, he saw not only betrayal, but the weight of a man crushed by regret. One evening, Alaric found Roland sitting by the abbey's outer wall, staring at the forest beyond. You should hate me, Roland said quietly. I did, Alaric admitted, for a moment, but hate doesn't heal anything. Roland's jaw tightened. I betrayed my oath, my king, and you. No prayer can wash that away. Then don't wash it away, Alaric said. Carry it. Let it remind you who you never want to be again. Roland's eyes burned, not with crimson fire, but with unshed tears. For the first time, his shoulders seemed lighter. Meanwhile, news from beyond the abbey grew darker. Messengers arrived breathless, bringing word of war brewing on every horizon. In England, King Stephen had gathered sorcerers who raised storms to sink Norman ships before they left port. In Saxony, Morcar's forces swelled. Entire villages emptied, their dead conscripted into armies of shambling corpses. In the Holy Roman Empire, whispers spread of dukes bargaining with witches, desperate for any advantage. And in Rome, the Pope thundered against heresy, declaring that all unbound sorcery must bend to the Church, or be purged. Letters came demanding Alaric's presence in Rome, where he would either be blessed or condemned. The abbey walls, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Odo urged immediate departure to Paris, to place Alaric firmly under the king's command. Eleanor counseled caution, fearing the crown would twist him into a weapon. Roland, still wrestling with guilt, offered little counsel, but when asked, he said simply, "Do not let others decide your path again." One night, Alaric dreamed. He walked through a battlefield under a sky torn by lightning. Corpses lay everywhere, their eyes glowing faintly red. In the distance, Morcar stood, his bone mask gleaming. You cannot heal the world. Morcar's voice echoed. Every soul you save, every traitor you redeem, will turn against you. Mercy is the chain that will drag you down. Alaric woke in a cold sweat, the runes burning under his skin. He stepped outside, staring at the moonlit forest, whispering to himself, I will not be your weapon, and I will not be your victim. But the night gave no answer, only the distant cry of ravens. At dawn, the abbey bell tolled again. Riders approached, bearing the king's banner. They brought orders sealed in wax. Alaric was commanded to Paris at once. The capital braced for war, and the king demanded his rune child stand beside him. Odo smiled grimly, triumphant. Eleanor frowned, knowing this was the very snare she had feared. Roland watched in silence, but Alaric noticed the way his hand rested on his sword hilt, not in anger, but as if ready to protect. The road to Paris lay ahead, uncertain, dangerous, and heavy with expectation. The abbey's walls would no longer shelter him. Europe itself now called, and with it, destiny's weight pressed harder than ever. Far away, in the caverns of Saxony, Morcar traced runes in blood across stone. His followers knelt in silence. Ravens crowded the rafters, their eyes burning like coals. Let the boy come to Paris, Morcar whispered. Let him stand beneath banners and crowns. For when the city burns, he will learn that mercy cannot shield him from fire. The ravens cawed in unison, a chorus of doom. Paris rose like a dream of stone and smoke. Towers thrust upward from the Ile de la Cité, their bells tolling above the constant roar of markets, barges, and prayers. Alaric had seen villages and towns, but nothing like this. A city alive, swollen with merchants, pilgrims, knights, and beggars. As their company entered through the eastern gate, crowds pressed in. Word had already spread. The rune child had come. Some fell to their knees, crying blessings. Others shrank back, clutching charms against evil. A few hurled curses, calling him demon. Soldiers pushed them aside, but their voices clung to Alaric's ears. The royal palace loomed ahead, its walls etched with protective sigils glowing faintly in the dusk. The company crossed the great hall, banners of lilies fluttering above, until they stood before King Louis. The monarch sat stiffly, his crown heavy, his eyes sharper than Alaric remembered. "You have been long in coming," Louis said coldly. "Rouen burns, Normandy falters, and still you hide in abbeys." Eleanor bowed. "Majesty, the boy needed guidance." "The boy is no longer a boy," Louis snapped. His gaze pierced Alaric. "You are France's hope. You will stand with me, or you will fall with the rest." The days in Paris were a storm of ceremony and suspicion. Bishops arrived demanding proof of Alaric's loyalty to the church. Nobles whispered in corners, some eager to use him, others plotting his downfall. Alaric found himself paraded like a relic. In Notre Dame, priests made him kneel before the altar, demanding he swear fealty to Rome. His hands trembled as he touched the cross. The runes stirred restlessly, as though resisting the binding. The Pope's envoy watched closely, quill scratching on parchment. That night, Odo praised him. "You see how they fear you? Good. Let fear shape their obedience." Eleanor scolded him. "They are chaining him to altars and crowns. He must learn freedom, not servitude." Roland said little, though when he escorted Alaric through the streets, he warned quietly, "Kings and priests smile with daggers hidden. Trust few." Paris itself became a battlefield of whispers. Alaric overheard nobles debating. With him, France will crush England. No, better to deliver him to Rome. Let the Pope decide. A boy with such power is more dangerous than any army. The city adored him and despised him in equal measure. Children begged him for blessings. Merchants offered him coins as if he could charm their fortunes. Beggars clutched at his cloak, crying for miracles. And in the shadows, Alaric sometimes glimpsed hooded figures watching from alleys, their eyes faintly glimmering red before vanishing. The pressure reached a peak during a grand council held in the palace. Bishops, nobles, and generals filled the hall. The king sat upon his throne, Alaric at his side. The Pope's envoy demanded that the rune child be sent to Rome for sanctification. Nobles shouted that he must remain in France as a weapon. Others muttered of heresy, insisting the church should purge him before his power grew. At last, King Louis silenced them with a raised hand. "Enough. France bleeds while you quarrel. The rune child will fight for his kingdom, and when we march against our enemies, he will march with us." The hall erupted again. Alaric's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to refuse, to claim his own destiny, but the weight of crowns, crosses, and swords pressed down. His voice failed. Only Eleanor's gaze steadied him. She mouthed silently across the hall, "Choose." That night, Alaric fled the palace rooftop to breathe beneath the stars. Paris glittered below, restless and vast. Roland joined him quietly, leaning against the stone. "They'll tear you apart," Roland muttered. "The king, the church, the nobles, each will claim a piece until nothing remains." "And if I refuse?" Alaric whispered. "They'll burn you." Silence stretched between them. Then Roland looked out at the city. "But you saved me. You saw light where no one else did. If you can do that, maybe you can survive this. Just don't let them decide who you are." Alaric said nothing, but the runes hummed beneath his skin, restless. Somewhere, deep within, they whispered a question that had no answer yet. Will you be savior or scourge? Far away, in Saxony, Morcar gazed into a bowl of black water. Images of Paris flickered, crowds chanting, bishops arguing, the boy trembling before crown and cross. "Good," Morcar murmured. "Let them bind him in chains of duty and fear. For when I strike, he will not know where his loyalties lie, and the world will burn with his indecision." The water rippled. Ravens cried. War crept closer. Days in Paris blurred into endless councils, prayers, and demands. Alaric was summoned before bishops who pressed relics into his hands, watching for signs of corruption. Generals demanded he bless their banners before riding north. Merchants slipped letters into his cloak, begging him to charm their fortunes. He felt less a person than a talisman. Wherever he went, eyes followed, hungry, fearful, desperate. His nights were no freer. The runes burned under his skin, whispering in his dreams. He often woke sweating, certain he had heard Morkar's voice echoing from the shadows. Eleanor remained his anchor. She reminded him that power without compassion was emptiness. But even she seemed troubled, watching the way Paris consumed him. Odo, in contrast, grew bolder. "This city is a forge," he told Alaric. "Let it temper you. Soon, you will command kings." Court life grew dangerous. A faction of nobles began to argue openly that Alaric should be removed from the king's side and delivered to Rome. One evening, as Alaric left the council chamber, a dagger flashed in the dark. Roland intercepted it with his gauntlet, shoving the assassin aside. Blood sprayed. The man crumpled, eyes burning faintly red before fading into emptiness. Roland wiped his blade clean. Morkar's eyes are here already. The attempt only deepened the city's division. Some swore it proved Alaric must stay under the king's protection. Others whispered it meant Shadow already claimed him. In the cathedral, Alaric sought silence. He lit a single candle, trying to steady his breath. But even there, he was not alone. The Pope's envoy appeared, robes heavy with gold, his face stern. "You are young," the envoy said coldly. "You are untested, and yet kings kneel to you. That is dangerous." "I never asked for it," Alaric whispered. "Danger does not ask permission," the envoy replied. He leaned closer. "If you wish to be sanctified, come to Rome. The Holy Father will cleanse you of doubt. But if you remain here, you will be no servant of God, only a pawn of France." The words coiled in Alaric's mind long after the envoy left. Meanwhile, Paris swelled with tension. Refugees poured in from Normandy and Burgundy, telling of villages burned by necromancy, of fields crawling with the restless dead. Markets groaned with scarcity. The people looked to Alaric with hope that bordered on desperation. One afternoon, a mother pushed through the crowd, thrusting a feverish infant into his arms. "Save her," she begged. Alaric's hands trembled as he touched the child. The runes stirred, glowing faintly. The infant's breathing eased, her cries softened. The crowd erupted in gasps. Some shouted prayers of thanks. Others muttered that no mortal should wield such grace. That night, Odo burst into his chamber. "Do you see? They worship you already. With a word, you could command them all. Why bow to kings or priests when you could be master?" Alaric recoiled. "I don't want to rule." "Then you will be ruled," Odo snarled. But even as the court feasted, as the bishops schemed and the king planned war, the shadow crept closer. On the city's outskirts, peasants whispered of fields where the soil turned black overnight. On the Seine's banks, fishermen found nets tangled with bones. At night, ravens gathered on the spires of Notre Dame, their cries harsh, unnatural. And in the tunnels beneath Paris, where the bones of centuries lay stacked in silence, something stirred. Rats fled. Air grew cold. Morkar's whisper seeped through stone. "Let them fatten him on hope. I will feast on despair." The court of Paris became a battlefield without swords. Every council boiled with arguments. Bishops thundered that Alaric must submit to Rome. Nobles plotted to keep him in France. Generals demanded he lead armies. Alaric sat through it all in silence, the weight pressing heavier each day. When he tried to speak, his words were twisted, seized upon by one faction or another. He felt less like a boy and more like a rope being pulled from both ends. At night, he walked the palace halls with Roland. The knight, once enemy, had become his shadow, loyal though haunted. "They will use you until you break," Roland said softly. "And what then?" Alaric asked. Roland's jaw tightened. "Then they'll burn you and move on to the next miracle." The breaking point came during a banquet meant to show unity. The king sat at the head of the hall, bishops to one side, nobles to the other, the rune child at the center like a jewel displayed. Wine flowed, words grew sharp. At last, one duke slammed his goblet down. "Enough! The boy is no Frenchman. He belongs to the church. Better Rome's leash than your ambition," another snapped. Odo rose, eyes blazing. "He belongs to none of you. His power answers only to discipline and to me." The hall erupted. Shouts, curses, even the scrape of steel. Then, suddenly, a voice rose above the din. It was Alaric's. "Stop!" The runes flared in his skin. Every torch in the hall blazed at once, shadows leaping like giants on the walls. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire. Alaric's voice shook, but carried. "I am not your crown, nor your relic, nor your weapon. If I fight, it will not be for your thrones. It will be for the people who cannot fight for themselves." Gasps rippled. The king's face hardened. The bishops muttered darkly, but among the servants and soldiers at the edges, a murmur of hope stirred. That night, the city whispered with rumors of rebellion. Some said the Rune Child had defied both crown and cross. Others swore he was a prophet. Still others hissed that he was Antichrist. Alaric tried to sleep, but the runes burned hot under his skin. His words had been truth, but truth made enemies. He feared what would come at dawn, and indeed dawn brought betrayal. A servant crept through the palace corridors bearing a message sealed with wax. He slipped it into the hands of a cloaked figure waiting in the gardens. The figure opened it and smiled. The letter bore the king's own seal. It ordered that the Rune Child be watched and, if he faltered, silenced. Far below, in the catacombs, Morcar stirred. His voice drifted through the bones. "Good. Let their fear rot their trust. When they turn on him, he will have nowhere to run but to me." The earth trembled faintly. Rats fled the tunnels. Ravens shrieked above the city spires. Paris slept uneasily, unaware that beneath its feet an army of the dead was already waking. It began with the bells. Just before dawn, Notre Dame's towers erupted in a frantic toll, their sound cutting through the mist like a blade. Soldiers scrambled from their barracks, peasants fled into narrow streets, and nobles bolted upright in their chambers. Alaric woke to the pounding of fists on his door. Roland burst in, armor half-fastened, sword already drawn. "They're here," he growled. Alaric stumbled to his feet, heart hammering. "Who?" Roland's jaw tightened. "The dead!" Paris boiled with panic. From the northern gates came a thunder of drums, not human, but hollow, made from bone and hide. The ground shook beneath thousands of feet, yet not all were living. Through the fog marched Morcar's army, corpses clad in rusted mail, eyes burning faintly red. Among them strode warlocks cloaked in black, their chants weaving a shroud of shadow that blotted the rising sun. The people screamed. Priests clutched relics. Soldiers tightened trembling hands around spears. Above them all, on a hill beyond the Seine, Morcar himself stood, bone mask gleaming in the gray light. Ravens circled him in endless swarms, their cries drowning the bells. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. Bishops shouted to seal the boy in the cathedral. Nobles demanded he lead the defense. Odo thundered that Alaric must strike first, unleashing fire upon the enemy before they reached the walls. Eleanor seized Alaric's arm. "Do not let them command you. Choose for yourself." The king's gaze was hard, desperate. "Rune Child, France stands at the edge. Save us, or all is lost." The weight of every eye bore down on him. Alaric felt the runes ignite, pressing for release. He could burn the field, shatter the corpses, silence the chants. But the power inside him felt wild, hungry, uncertain. Could he control it, or would it consume friend and foe alike? The choice was torn from him. With a deafening crack, the northern gates burst inward. Undead poured into the streets, clawing, hacking, dragging the living down beneath them. Panic spread faster than fire. "Go!" Roland shouted, dragging Alaric toward the walls. Eleanor followed, staff blazing with light. Odo's voice boomed, summoning wards of flame to hold the courtyard. They reached the ramparts just as the first wave hit. Alaric looked down into a sea of corpses, endless, relentless. The runes inside him howled. He raised his hand, and fire exploded outward, a torrent that lit the night brighter than day. Dozens of corpses turned to ash. Soldiers roared in triumph. But the fire did not stop. It surged, hungry, threatening to leap back toward the city itself. Alaric strained, sweat pouring down his face, forcing the flames to bend, to die. At last, gasping, he pulled it back. The walls stood, but scorched, trembling. The soldiers stared at him with both awe and fear. Some cheered. Others crossed themselves, whispering of damnation. Through the smoke, Morcar raised his hand. The corpses halted. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames. Then his voice boomed across the city. "Rune child, you burn the world to save it. You will burn yourself next. Come to me and I will show you mercy. Refuse and Paris will drown in shadow." The words pressed into Alaric's skull like nails. For a heartbeat he saw it, Paris burning, people screaming, Eleanor and Roland falling to ash. Was it vision or threat? Eleanor's voice cut through the haze. "Do not listen!" Roland's hand gripped his shoulder, grounding him. Odo shouted, "Strike him now! End it before he grows stronger!" Alaric's choice loomed like the flames themselves. Answer Morcar, unleash the runes again, or find another path he had yet to see. And all around, Paris screamed as the siege truly began. The dead poured through the shattered gates like a black tide. Steel clashed against rotted shields, screams echoed through the narrow streets, and fire spread from house to house as torches and spells alike set the city ablaze. On the ramparts, Alaric fought to steady his breath. The runes surged in him like a storm, begging to be unleashed again. He clenched his fists, forcing them down. To lose control here would mean burning friend and foe together. Roland drew his blade and pointed toward the chaos. "The gates won't hold. We have to fight them in the streets." Odo snarled, flames gathering in his hands. "Let the boy burn them all. Better ash than surrender." Eleanor struck her staff on the stone, light rippling outward. "No, he must not become the fire they fear. We defend with discipline. Alaric, come with me." They rushed down from the walls into the winding streets. The city had become a labyrinth of terror. Corpses staggered through alleys, tearing down doors, dragging shrieking villagers into the open. Soldiers rallied where they could, forming desperate shields around pockets of survivors. Alaric raised his hands, the runes glowing faintly. He whispered, not commanding, but pleading, and the stones of the street trembled. Walls shifted, archways collapsed, blocking alleys and slowing the dead. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he pressed on, shaping the city itself into a weapon of defense. "Good," Eleanor said beside him, her staff blazing as she scattered shadows. "You choose protection, not slaughter. Hold to that." Yet betrayal struck from within. At the palace gates, as knights rallied to defend the king, a group of nobles slipped away. Their leader held a parchment sealed with Rome's crest. "The boy is a danger," he hissed. "Better to deliver him to the Pope than let France burn for his sake." They opened a postern gate, intending to flee, but shadow awaited them. Hooded figures with crimson eyes fell upon them. Their screams were brief. Morcar's spies had not come for Rome's loyalty. They had come to widen the breach. By dawn's first light, the dead surged from two sides, tightening the noose around the heart of Paris. Alaric and his companions reached Notre Dame. The cathedral doors were barred, but hundreds of citizens had already taken shelter inside. Peasants, nobles, even wounded soldiers. Priests led frantic prayers. The air trembled with both faith and fear. Eleanor raised her staff. "This place is warded. Here at least they will be safe." "Safe?" Odo spat. "Trapped is more like it. We should take the boy to face Morcar now." Roland stepped between them, eyes hard. "He isn't your pawn, not anymore." The two men glared, sparks of flame and light dancing dangerously. Alaric pushed between them, voice trembling but steady. "Stop. We fight for Paris, not for crowns, not for Rome. For them." He pointed to the cowering crowd. Mothers clutching infants. Old men muttering prayers, children staring with wide, terrified eyes. Silence fell. Even Odo could not argue against their need. But outside, the city groaned under shadow. Morcar's army pressed closer to the cathedral, chanting in guttural voices. The air grew heavy, stinking of rot and smoke. Ravens darkened the sky, blotting out the morning sun. On the steps of Notre Dame, Morcar himself appeared, bone mask gleaming, his cloak trailing across the stones. His voice carried into the cathedral like a blade through the soul. Runechild, he called. You shield them now, but you cannot shield them forever. Come to me, and I will spare them. Refuse, and they will all die screaming. Gasps rippled through the crowd inside. All eyes turned to Alaric. Mothers begged, soldiers muttered, even priests faltered in their prayers. The runes burned under Alaric's skin. His choice loomed heavier than any blade. Surrender to Morcar to save the people, or stand and risk their destruction. And all around, Paris burned.